An atheist was walking through the woods, admiring all the natural evolution. And he said, what majestic trees and what powerful rivers and what beautiful animals. He's just pondering what wonders there were in nature. Walking alongside a river, and he heard some rustling in the bushes behind him. And as he turned around, he saw a 7-foot grizzly bear emerging, and the grizzly bear locked in on him and ran towards him. And they run fast, 35 miles an hour. But if a grizzly bear was running at you, I think you'd do the same thing he did. He turned and he ran fast. He ran as fast as he could up the path. He kept looking over his shoulder, and the grizzly bear was getting closer and closer. So he tried to run faster. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked over his shoulder, and the bear was even closer. His heart was pumping frantically as he tried to run even faster. In fact, he ran so fast that he tripped himself and fell on the ground. He rolled over to pick himself up, and the bear was right on top of him, raising that big old paw with those big claws, and he was just about to take a swat at him when the atheist said, "Oh my God!" And just then, time stopped. The bear froze. The forest was silent. The river even stopped moving. And a bright light shone on the man, and a voice from the sky said, "You deny my existence all these years. You teach others that I don't exist. You even credit all my creation to a cosmic accident. And now you expect me to somehow get you out of this predicament? Am I to count you now as a believer?" The atheist, ever so proud, looked into the light and he said, "I suppose it would be rather hypocritical for me to ask to become a Christian after all these years, but I know, could you make the bear a Christian?" "Very well," said the voice. The light went out. The river ran. The sounds of the forest continued. The bear put down his paw. And then, very reverently, the bear put his paws together, bowed his head, and said, "Lord, I give you thanks for this food that I'm about to receive." That story's worth retelling. Psalm 53 verse 1 says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." You say, "Clay, are you calling me a fool if I don't believe in God?" No. But God is. In fact, that verse is found twice in the Psalms. It's not saying you're not a good person or not a person that you're not saying God doesn't love you, but he's saying you're being foolish if you're denying his existence. Now, scientifically, you cannot conclusively prove that God exists, just as you cannot prove that he does not exist. In fact, the Bible does not attempt to prove that God exists. It just begins assuming that he exists. It tells us a lot about him, what he's like. But it doesn't try to, give you a detailed argument in favor of his existence. It just assumes there is a God. Fourth word of the Bible. What's the fourth word of the Bible? In the beginning, what? God. God created the heaven and the earth. And even though we can't prove in a laboratory that God exists, that does not mean that there's no evidence for God's existence. In fact, I believe, and I think many of you, if not most of you, will agree with me, that there is lots of good evidence. In fact, the Bible says, God says through his word, that there is no excuse for atheism. I'd like to take you to begin in Romans chapter 1. And many of you are participating in a reading plan as we start this new series called Believe. It's broken into 3 parts: think, and act, and be. We're beginning today officially part 1. And if you're reading along with us, then you read a chapter this week in advance. You can read it next week if you want. But the first chapter is all about just readings from the Old and New Testament about God. It's a collection of biblical content. And we're going to have fun together with this. We're going to learn. We're going to grow spiritually. As I read through that first chapter, there is no way that I could like preach on all those verses. So I and other pastors, as we go through the series, will pick selected verses from the reading to go a little deeper during the message. Since God, okay, let's look at this first. Romans 1, verses 18 to 20. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of the people who suppress the truth. Remember those words, suppress the truth. Suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been, notice, clearly seen, being understood by from what has been made, so that people are what? Without excuse. Since God is the creator and we are the creatures, there's no way for us to know anything about him unless he chooses to reveal something to us or some things. And thankfully, he has done that. God has revealed himself to us. And he does that primarily in two ways. Theologians like to break these things down and use terminology to think about it. And here's a couple phrases that you read a lot if you read theological studies about God. God has revealed himself to us through general revelation and special revelation. First, think about general revelation. That's a phrase that's used to describe the revelation of God that is available to all people at all times at any place on this planet. Okay? When you see, the more intricate the design you see in something, like a watch, the more intricate the design, the more sure you are that there must be a designer, that these things just don't happen by themselves, right? And so the intricate design of the universe implies that there's a designer behind it. Now, general revelation doesn't tell us everything there is to know about God. Basically, according to this verse, it just tells us two things: that he exists and that he's powerful. You look at everything in this world that exists, it is filled with complexity in its design. And it tells us there is something bigger than everything else around here. There is a first cause. There is a designer. And this text says we can know two things from just looking at nature: God's eternal power and his divine nature. That is, that he exists, he's a divine being, and that he is powerful. I mean, it takes a powerful, powerful divine being to do all this, right? General revelation is sufficient to demonstrate that God exists, and it is sufficient to hold us accountable and therefore declare us guilty if we choose to deny God. But general revelation is insufficient for a clear knowledge of God's plan of salvation through Jesus. Without the Bible, without Jesus coming to this planet, you can't just go out and look at a beautiful sunset or beautiful, flower blooming or a waterfall and say, Jesus died for my sins. It doesn't teach us that. And so, general revelation, fortunately, is not the only way that God has revealed himself. He has also made himself known through special revelation. And whenever and wherever on this planet a person starts to reach out toward God, as a result of general revelation, as a result of looking at all that God has made and saying there must be someone behind this and before this and above this, and whenever someone starts down that road, God then sends that person some form of special revelation so that he or she can understand more about who he is and what he's like and how he loves us and how he's provided salvation for us through his son, Jesus Christ. One of my favorite examples of this is one that I experienced personally years ago. I've talked about it before, but Selena and I, shortly after we got married, 6 months after, we went for a year to Indonesia to serve as missionaries, and we were teaching conversational English during the day and then offering free Bible classes at night so people could practice their English in a Muslim country with a lot of animists and Buddhists and Muslims trying to introduce Jesus in a creative way. And it was hard work, but we did make some progress in building relationships with people while we were there. And I made two friends, one who was willing to be a translator for me and another who was a doctor, younger Indonesian men. And we decided to take a trip together, and we got on motorcycle. We borrowed motorcycles, and I think this was my first adventure motorcycle ride. We go up into the mountains, and we get onto smaller and smaller roads until basically the road ends. So we stored our motorcycles with some Americans who were there translating the Bible into a tribal language with Wycliffe Bible translators. And we hiked. We hiked for miles, up, down, through rivers, had to tuck our socks in so we didn't get leeches up our pant legs. And we I saw a snake that was so long that he went all the way across the road and hung over both sides. It was big old python. And saw these little boys that had blowguns, and they were trying to hunt monkeys. And I don't know if they'd ever seen a white guy, because when they saw me, they got really afraid and took off running. I wanted to have them give me a lesson on how to use a blowgun, but they didn't want anything to do with it. So we get up there, and we get up to this tribe where they're called the tree people. They live up in the trees. They have stakes that hold these, and it's because of there was some tribal warfare years ago, but it's more because of superstitions. I mean, there are animals that, could be dangerous if you're on the ground, but a lot of it has to do with them thinking that spirits are down along the ground, and if they can get up above them, they'll be safer. And they've been featured in National Geographic. It's a very famous area in terms of a primitive society. Well, they had a church there. They had this church that was kind of like the churches we build down in. We've already built one in Ecuador, and we're going to build another one in Peru, thanks to the generosity of this church last year. But, those are basic concrete floors, blocks, and steel roofs. But very nice for the tree people. They had this church, and I'm like, how in the world do you guys become Christians and get a church up here? And they told me a story through two translators. It's the first time I ever preached with two translators, because they had to go into Indonesia and then into their dialect. And so they bring out the chief of the tribe. He's probably 35. And I meet him, and we talk for a little bit. And I say, well, how'd you guys become Christians? How'd you get a church? And he said, well, you got to meet my mother. So he brings out his elderly mother. And he says, she had a dream many years ago. And in her dream, she saw this man, this foreigner, come into the tribe. And he had a message of hope and truth for the tribe that we desperately needed. That's all she knew about her dream. And she woke up, and she was so overwhelmed by this dream that she told everybody she knew about it. And she never forgot it. Until 15 years later, a missionary came walking into that tribe, and that woman recognized his face from her dream 15 years earlier. And she told everyone. And her son was the chief, and everybody did what the chief said, and the chief said, we're going to listen to this guy. And they did. And the whole 3 different tribes actually all shared one church there. 3 different areas of tree people all became Christians as a result of God sending a dream in preparation 15 years later to a woman in the middle of nowhere. That's the kind of God he is. He's seeking to reach every person on this planet with the saving message of Jesus. And I believe that no one will be lost unless they resist. He will go to any length to bring special revelation to those who are open to accepting what he has revealed through general revelation. Those honest-hearted seekers out there, even in the jungle, God will go to great lengths to reach them. So, people ask me sometimes, and I ask myself, what if an honest seeker for truth dies before special revelation arrives? What if people responded, there must be a God, to everything he revealed, but they never knew about Jesus? Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, the only way to the Father, according to what he himself declared in the New Testament, and Christians believe. And so some people believe that you must have said the word of Jesus and confessed him out loud with your mouth to be saved. That's one view. I personally believe that it is impossible to be saved except through Jesus and his perfect provision. But how God chooses to do that may be different sometimes with different people. God will take care of special cases. He's both just and merciful, and I'm glad that He's the judge and we can trust Him. But I believe that every single person who is saved for eternity will thank Jesus for their salvation. No one will thank themselves, pat themselves on the back. Good job, you got here. No. When the Bible talks about casting down our crowns, it's talking about our humility and our gratitude for the salvation that Jesus did for us, what we can never do for ourselves, right? But that doesn't mean that there might be some people who the first time they actually hear the word Jesus is in heaven, and they learn to praise Him for their salvation because of where they lived and what they were exposed to, and God knows the heart and the direction of our lives, and I'm thankful for that, aren't you? But whenever God directly communicates with us, that is special revelation. Here's a good summary example in Hebrews 1:1-2. It says, in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets. It's one way He's communicated. At many times and in various ways. Many different ways. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed heir over all things, through whom He made the universe. The text says God spoke in various ways. Historically, visions, dreams, prophets are mentioned, audible voices sometimes, even out of a burning bush, messengers, angels, even a donkey one time. God can speak any way He wants, and He has done so in various ways. But all these forms of communication, these verses we just read say, were inferior to the ultimate supreme revelation, of course, which is His Son, Jesus, the ultimate revelation from heaven to earth. Now, these days, the primary way that we access special revelation from God and we understand more about Him is through His Word, through the Scriptures. We're going to talk more about the Bible in 2 weeks and how we know we can trust this and how we can utilize God's love letter to us to build a closer relationship with Him. His Son and His Word, that's special revelation. And His Word is what tells us about His Son, what He had to say and what He did. Now, with God seeking to make Himself known to His creatures, both through general and special revelation, these two books declare His existence so effectively. Why is it that there is so much unbelief in the world today? Well, we read in Romans 1, verse 18, the reason it says because some people choose to suppress the truth. Today we live in a modern world where the majority of scientists have bought into a philosophy called naturalism. Growing out of Darwinism, naturalism has become basically the scientific creed for more than 100 years. Naturalism is the belief that nothing exists beyond the universe. Nothing exists beyond nature, let's say. One naturalist scientist states his view this way: everything that exists is simply the result of blind chance and eternal matter interacting over endless eons of time in an infinitely old universe. That means that all the bewildering complexity and diversity on this life, in this world, on this planet, comes from chance mutation, starting with lifeless chemical brew that produced the first living molecule out of an electrically charged slime pond. I mean, that's the best I can make out of what's being taught. And what do you think the odds are that this universe and everything in it is a result of blind chance? It's unfathomable, it seems. But natural scientists say, that's all right. We have all the time needed. Just give us enough time and anything can happen. For more than a century, faith in God has been viewed as unscientific. But the rapid increase that has also happened in scientific understanding has actually made it easier, not harder, to believe in an intelligent designer and a first cause of all creation. For example, there's scientific, we don't know for sure, but there's scientific evidence that supports the so-called Big Bang. The belief that the whole universe began with a massive explosion at a definite point in time, that it did not exist before that. That scientific theory that derives from the fact that, the planets seem to be expanding away from each other, like they all came from a point in time. That belief challenged the view that the universe always existed. If it started at a point in time, it didn't always exist, right? And so the Big Bang Theory actually opened the door wide open for the possibility that God was behind that Big Bang. Couple that with the incredible discoveries that have been made in both cosmology, the macro universe out there, and biochemistry and molecular biology, which is the micro universe inside us and inside everything. Scientific findings in these areas have led people to start seeing, many people, the handiwork of intelligent design. That shouldn't be a surprise to those of us who believe God's word. Back in Psalm 19, we read these words, beginning with verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them, of course. But yet, at the same time, their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. The heavens declare the glory of God. There is no place on this planet where you cannot see the sun and stars, at least at certain periods. Excuse me. And we're all looking at the same stars and constellations that David looked at when he wrote this psalm all those years ago. He was out with his sheep, playing his harp, thinking about God, writing a psalm, looking at the same stars we see. John Calvin wrote, "There is not a spot in the universe wherein one cannot discern at least some sparks of his glory." Doesn't matter whether you're in a city or a jungle, whether you're in New York or New Zealand, London or Lagos, Paris or Peru, Rome or Rwanda. Everything, everywhere gives evidence that there is a God. General revelation sometimes whispers and sometimes shouts at us about God's creative power, about his greatness. Whether it's the beauty of a sunset, whether it's a beach, whether it's a mountain range, whether it's a flower, the laugh of a child, a snowflake, creation is crying out, there's something more. Have you ever studied the fine-tuning of the universe? Fascinating to me. Scientists in the fields of astronomy and physics talk about the anthropic principle. Anthropic, that humans would exist on this planet. Takes fine-tuning. Any life. Our solar system is exquisitely calibrated to support life. Life on this earth could not exist unless the universe was incredibly fine-tuned in such a way that life can exist. A few examples of the fine-tuning of the universe. There's a perfect balance on earth. It never wobbles in its orbit, unlike other celestial objects. And Psalm 104, verse 5 says, God has set the earth on its foundation. It cannot be moved. Science bears that out. If the earth was 1% closer to the sun, we'd all fry. Water would start boiling within 3 minutes. If the earth was 1% farther from the sun, we'd all freeze. All water would freeze solid and the earth would become a barren desert. If the sun was 1 degree farther from the center of the galaxy, planets could not have formed around it. If it was 1 degree closer to the center and stellar density, it would throw the earth out of orbit. If the moon was slightly larger or slightly closer, tides would sweep the coastlines with massive flooding. If the moon was slightly farther away or slightly smaller, then life in the oceans would die due to lack of nutrient movement from gravitational currents by tides. If the Earth was 2 degrees farther from Jupiter, asteroids and comets would plummet our planet like machine guns and just knock us into oblivion. Because Jupiter is like this giant protective shield for us. But if Jupiter was slightly closer, its gravitational pull would destabilize the Earth. We're talking about just fractions here of difference. If the Earth's gravity was 1/1000th stronger, just a little bit stronger, the planet would retain too much gas and we'd all suffocate. If gravity was 1/1000th weaker, there'd be too much water evaporation and the planet would dry up. If the magnetic field of the Earth was 1/1000th stronger, electromagnetic storms would wipe us all out. If it was 1/1000th weaker, the ozone layer would be too thin to protect against fatal radiation. If the rotation of the Earth was slightly slower, the difference in temperatures between night and day would kill vegetation. If it was slightly faster, wind velocities would be at hurricane level all the time. If there was slightly more oxygen in the air, plants would burst into flame with the slightest spark. If there was slightly less oxygen, nothing living could breathe. Our planet is one of the only ones in our solar system with a perfect circular orbit. And if that orbit was elliptic, more oval-shaped, like some planets, we'd all freeze on the outer loop when we got farthest from the sun. There's hundreds of such examples, and many of them are so sophisticated, I'm not going to bring them to you because I can't even understand them and read them. But I've read through these to support life. It has to be exquisitely calibrated in order for life to exist on this planet. Now, what are the odds of all this happening by random chance? Just think about that honestly. The law of physics are designed with such precision that it's inconceivable that all that could just randomly be a result of chance. In fact, for just one of those many examples I gave you, and again, I could give many more, for just one of those, the odds of that happening by chance are 1 in 10 to the 37th power. You take 10 and put 17 zeros on it. You say, well, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything to me. Dr. Hugh Ross, in his book, The Creator and the Cosmos, explains what that means. He says, 1 part in 10 to the 37th power is such an incredible sensitive balance that it's hard to visualize. The following analogy might help. Cover the entire North American continent in dimes all the way to the moon, a height of 239,000 miles. Okay, so get that picture. We got a pile of dimes over this whole North America, includes Canada, all the way to the moon, 239,000 miles. That's a lot of dimes. Next, pile dimes from here to the moon, same size pile, on 1 billion other continents the size of North America. Okay, you got what we're saying here? Lots of dimes. Billion planets, all the way to the moon. Next, he says, paint 1 dime red, mix it randomly into one of those billions of piles, blindfold a friend, and tell him he's got 1 chance to pick 1 dime. The odds that he'll pick that red dime are 10 to the 37th power. So you're telling me there's a chance. Yeah, it does take faith to believe in God. But it's not blind faith. It's faith based on evidence. And I would submit to you that it takes more faith not to believe in Him. Because the more you learn about the universe, the more that becomes true. I gave you a few examples from the macro world, looking up and out. And there's many more. But what about the micro world, looking down and in? By the way, Darwin, and he made some good discoveries. We all believe in, selective adaptations. You look at nature and you see the survival of the fittest. You see evolution on a small scale, not jumping species, but as species evolve over time and adapt. Yeah, but here's what Darwin didn't have. He didn't have access to everything we've learned since, but he didn't have access to sophisticated microscopes that we have now to discover the level of complexity, cellular level. He couldn't see that. No one could. He had no idea that if you go all the way down to the cellular level and study it, you will find in some situations irreducible complexity. Something that couldn't exist as it waited for other parts because every part is necessary. He was unaware of all that. We're not. We've learned a lot. Just take one example, DNA. Let me show you a picture here. DNA in our cells is very similar to a complicated computer program. So there's two pictures here. The one on the right is what a computer program looks like. I don't know anything about it, but I've researched it, okay? It's made up of a series of ones and zeros. It's called a binary code. That's on the right. And that sequencing and ordering of ones and zeros is what it takes for a computer to work properly. Now, DNA is very similar. On the left is an example of DNA. It's made up of 4 chemicals abbreviated with the letters A, T, G, and C. And so it's much like the computer with the ones and zeros. You take those letters and you arrange those letters. You can see how they're arranged in one human cell. And you'll start reading that cell, and it might be C, G, T, G, T, G, A, C, T, T, G, A, T, so on. It just keeps going. In fact, what's amazing is that within the tiny space of every cell in your body, there is a code of 3 billion letters long. In one cell, there's a 3 billion letter code that defines that cell. To grasp the amount of DNA information in one cell, a living reading of that code at a rate of 3 letters per second would take 31 years, even if you read day and night and didn't stop. Take you 31 years. One cell, just to read the DNA code. Perry Marshall, an information specialist, comments on the implications of this. He says, there has never existed a computer program that wasn't designed. Whether it is a code or a program or a message given through a language, there's always an intelligent mind behind it. On June 26, 2000, President Clinton congratulated those who had completed the human genome sequencing. And he said this, President Clinton said, "Today we are learning the language in which God created life. We are gaining even more awe for the complexity, the beauty, the wonder of God's most divine and sacred gift." And then Dr. Francis Collins, director of the Human Genome Project, followed Clinton to the podium, and he stated this: "It is humbling for me and awe-inspiring to realize that we have caught the first glimpse of our own instruction book previously known only to God." The words of Scripture are just as true today as when they were written in Acts 14, 15 through 17. It says, "The living God who made the heavens and earth and sea and everything in them has not left himself without testimony." Now, how could scientists examine the evidence of modern scientific discoveries and not admit that there must be a designer behind all this exquisite, complex design? Listen to this searing indictment by science historian Patrick Gwynn of George Washington University. He writes, "Many scientists are willing to accept wild speculation about unseen universes and self-generating matter for which not a shred of observational evidence exists. This suggests something about the power of the modern atheistic ideology and the cultural agenda of many in the scientific profession. The mainstream scientific community has in effect shown its attachment to an atheistic ideology of a random universe to be in some respects more powerful than their commitment to the scientific method itself. That indictment echoes the words written by the Apostle Paul 2 millenniums ago in Romans 1, where he says, even though some will suppress the truth, they are without excuse because God has made himself known through what he has made. In fact, we read those a couple verses there in Romans 1. Let's read two more. Romans 1, verse 21 says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, for their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. The advance of science in the last several decades has changed the playing field. No one can truthfully say that atheists go by the facts and Christians only go by faith. Because the debate is not between the facts, about the facts. The debate is two worldviews, naturalism or Christianity. Not the facts. We're all interpreting the same facts, but you interpret those facts different if you're coming at it with a commitment to naturalism versus Christianity. I'd like to show you a little chart here, a continuum of belief. And maybe you find yourself somewhere on this chart, or maybe you know someone else who's not where you are, from all the way over to no way, to I don't know, I don't care. Possibly there's a God. Probably, I really do believe it's likely to become a very core conviction. And the goal of this series is that wherever you are, you start moving to the right. If you're already all the way to the right, let's make this a core conviction that's so deep and rooted in our heart it influences not only what we think but how we act and how we behave, what we become, our character. And let's understand the basic beliefs well enough that we can share it with others why we believe what we believe. But if you're not to the core conviction stage yet, I'm so glad that you're going to be a part of this series, whether you're online or whether you're here in person, because let's do some work together and let's think carefully about these things, and let's see if we can move. You know, people don't usually go from one extreme to the other, from the far left of that continuum to the right. They usually bump incrementally because of what they read, what they hear, people that influence them, think they coming to check out church, different things, get joined in a small group. They move incrementally. And so my prayer and our staff's prayer for all of you is that wherever you are, you'll continue to move closer to the Lord and make this your core conviction. And that's the goal of the Believe series. It's for us to examine and establish our beliefs as core convictions. And the way you maximize spiritual growth during this series will be reading in advance. The resources are available out there if you'd like to grab them. Coming every week to hear the teaching or tuning in every week from wherever you are. And then finding a way to discuss what's been presented in the reading and in the teaching. In a family or with a group of some kind. Connect group, a community group. If you're not in a group and you'd like to consider opening your house for a group, we're going to have host training. You don't need to sign up. Just show up. As soon as the service is over, go to the conference room by the fireplace for 20 minutes. Right after the service, and we'll help you get ready to host a group. If you are new in the area and you don't know anybody to invite, why don't you think about coming Thursday night to our Connect group? Everyone's welcome. If you don't have a place to connect, come to our Connect group. I prepared a video already that's going to be shown, going to be sent out, watched in all the videos. Other pastors will be participating in that, and then your study guide will give you some good reflection questions. Yes, it takes faith to believe in God, but it is a reasonable faith that is based on high probability. We all make decisions, by the way, every day based on high probability. We know that some people have head-on collisions and die in automobiles, arrive at our destination safely. Don't insist on absolute proof for the existence of God. That's not how you live your everyday life. Every day you look at the evidence and you make decisions based on high probability. You look at the evidence and you see if there is enough evidence to tip the scales of probability. And I believe, I've only just given you a tiny bit today, but I believe there is sufficient evidence for the existence of God for an honest jury to arrive at a unanimous conclusion that is beyond reasonable doubt. Fortunately, God has revealed himself to us. And next week, we're going to talk about some of what he's revealed about himself. We're going to not just talk about God, but we're going to talk about, we're going to read about, and we're going to study about a personal God. What kind of a God is he? The ultimate revelation of the Father came through the Son, Jesus. And the Bible teaches us that God dwells in community, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. One God, three persons. It's a mystery. If you want to know what God is like, just look at Jesus. Hebrews 1:1-3 reads, "In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe." The Son is the radiance of God's glory. You want to know what God's like? Look at Jesus. He's the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for revealing yourself to us, for creating all that we can see and that we can't see in this massive university, and for creating humans in your own image, to have a relationship